Week 6 does not look like a classic week for the waiver wire, but do not worry because we've got QB streamers, we've got running backs who are low owned, we've got wide receivers less than 1% rostered, and we're going to talk you through all of those options. I'm Tom Strachan, you know my written work from Fantasy Pros. This is Fantasy Sanctuary, let's get into it. Look, we've got to start at the top, and we've got to start with the guys who just went off this weekend because you have to go and check whether they're there. Starting with Michael Carter, 39% rostered. Look, DeMarcado, he did lead the team in rushing yards yesterday, but Michael Carter clearly had the lead back role. Bam Knight, he did mix in a little bit, but not huge amounts. Carter, 17 rushes, 51 yards, and a touchdown, as well as 5 receptions for 22 yards. That's really strong usage, and we can make use of that. And there won't always be weeks where DeMarcado and Bam Knight are mixing in as much because the Cardinals, they were in control for large portions of this game. But I'd expect Michael Carter to continue to see the majority of the work. Next week's matchup against the Colts is definitely more of an interesting matchup there. How they will defend the Cardinals' running game. So it might not be a great start every week, but you've got to go and check if Carter's available. Look, we'll get one more running back out of the way, and then we'll start getting down to some lower rostered guys. But Rico Dowdle, 23 carries for 206 rushing yards, 4 targets, touchdown, 28 receiving yards. Next week, they play the Dallas Cowboys, who give up the 6th most running back fantasy points. I know that Chuba Hubbard is still out there and could potentially return, but the way the coaches talked about his injury, it sounded a lot more like he could be week to week and possibly miss next week as well. It's an incredible matchup. Honestly, it might not last for a long time, but Rico Dowdle, worth double checking that he's not on waivers. Right, let's dig into some of these guys who are lower owned and you should have a better chance of getting off waivers this week. Kendre Miller, 31% rostered. Per PFF, Miller led the Saints in rush attempts while Alvin Kamara played a season-low 56% of the team's offensive snaps. It's just been trending this way for Alvin Kamara. They even used Kendre Miller on all short yardage snaps in week 5. Miller, he finished with 10 carries for 41 yards and an 8-yard catch. Meanwhile, Kamara ran 8 times for 27 yards. He is going to keep catching the ball, though. That's where Kamara is at his most useful. But the Saints season, yes, they got that win against the Giants, but it's spiraling around the toilet, and sooner or later they could get flushed. And if that happens, don't be surprised if Alvin Kamara wants to request a trade and go and play for a contender for once. Right, I said we had some super low-owned running backs, and we do. We've also got some super low-owned wide receivers coming up later. But let's start with Hassan, Haskins, Kimani, Vidal, both less than 1% rostered. So I don't want to hear that they're not available in your league. Omarion Hampton suffered a left ankle injury and was seen in a walking boot after the Titans' Week 5 win. This was a really miserable sight to see because Omarion Hampton's been one of the stories of the season so far. He's been so fun, and after we saw what happened to Najee Harris, it felt like the chance could be there for Omarion Hampton to be a league winner. Next week, they're playing Miami, which is just an absolute cupcake of a matchup. We want to start everybody we possibly can. Now, this is going to get a little murky, though. Kimani Vidal was obviously drafted last year. There were a lot of people who thought he'd be a sleeper for last year, and it didn't materialize. Hassan Haskins, though. Hassan Haskins has history with Jim Harbaugh, and I think that he is just a player that we want to be targeting. He played 8 of the 9 snaps immediately after Omarion Hampton left the game. Vidal did close out that drive, but it was Haskins who they turned to first. He's been the primary backup coming in and spelling Hampton over the last couple of weeks on early downs. And look, against Miami, I think that's going to be a lot of rushing the ball and being able to take advantage of a weak defense. We're going to get to quarterback streamers in just a second, but if it's your first time finding us, hit the subscribe button down below, hit the like button, and tell me who you want off waivers this week. And if you got problems, you got questions, drop them in the comments and I will always get back to you. So let's talk QB streamers because we still do have the bye weeks to contend with. Bryce Young, 19% rostered, gets the Cowboys in week 6. Look, Dallas, they've allowed the most for points to opposing quarterbacks through the first 4 weeks of the season. And then in week 5, what do they do? Justin Fields goes out and puts up 25 points. Now, of course, Justin Fields, the way that he scores points is going to be bolstered because he does a lot with his legs. But Bryce Young does add a little bit with his legs too. And it seems like as up and down as Bryce Young is, this team, they're not throwing in the towel just yet. Teteroa McMillan continues to make great plays. The Panthers reportedly are going to open the window for Jalen Coker to start practicing. So maybe we see a bit better passing game from Bryce Young. And generally, the Cowboys are a team we want to start players against. Jaxson Dart, 39% rostered. So yeah, He's definitely a lot more rostered than Bryce Young is. But for a second straight game, he just looked fantastic with rushing production. For a second straight game, he had over 50 yards on the ground. He also added 200 yards through the air, 2 passing touchdowns. Of course, he also did end up with 2 interceptions, which is not what we want to see. But the Giants, it looks like they're going to be playing from behind plenty because of the way that their team is built right now. And that means we're going to see plenty of chances for Jaxson Dart to drop back, plenty of chances where he needs to scramble to make a play. And so far, we're talking about a player who's averaging over 18 fantasy points in 2 games. That is good returns for the quarterback position. And because of that rushing floor, there aren't many quarterbacks who average over 50 rushing yards per game. That really makes him every week playable until we see otherwise. Obviously, week 6 against the Eagles is far from a nice matchup. But look, if you're desperate, then you're desperate. And I'd rather take a shot on a guy who can give me 50 yards on the ground than a guy who is just reliant on touchdowns and passing through the air. Romeo Doubs, 50% rostered on Yahoo leagues. So look, yeah, I get this. He might not be available in every league, but coming off the Packers bye, it's worth going and checking. Coming off his last game, 3 touchdowns, absolutely ridiculous efficiency given he only had 6 receptions. Already had 1 other touchdown this season. And he's kind of been nicely involved with the Packers trying to figure things out. I don't mind Matthew Golden. If Matthew Golden's out there, I would also consider picking him up as well. And next up, it's the Bengals. We just saw what the Lions did to the Bengals. You can absolutely do what you want against this defense. And I just think that Romeo Doubs has earned some respect as a touchdown scorer, and I'd be willing to roster him purely for that matchup. Diving deeper at the wide receiver position, what about Ryan Flournoy? Now, he is rostered in less than 1% of Yahoo leagues. I thought Jalen Tolbert would be more involved without Kevontae Turpin out there. But he had just 1 target. Meanwhile, Flournoy led the receivers in targets with 9. He also had 2 carries, ended up with 124 total yards. Next week, we play Carolina, whose defense is respectable, but they also play Washington in week 7. So if you're in deep leagues where you're starting 4 or 5 wide receivers, if you're in a league where the waiver wire is just barren, then I don't mind taking Ryan Flournoy as just a dart throw and seeing how it pans out. Slightly more rostered, Troy Franklin, 30% rostered on Yahoo. He's been above 9.5 PPR points in 4 or 5 games. That's a pretty decent return at the wide receiver position when we start getting to this level. He consistently plays on 2 or 3 wide receiver formations, averaging 7 targets per game. Plays the Jets this week. Now, the Jets, they still seem to have this aura of a tough defense, but that's not what we're seeing from them. Teams are able to pass on them. Teams are able to break them down. And they're actually playing to a decent enough level that teams need to put up points. This game is in London, which, London games, I know as well as anybody, they get a bit funky at times. But Troy Franklin has consistently been useful this year, and I feel like Troy Franklin, as the bye weeks get messier, is somebody that you're going to want to roster. Going back to the running back position, for my favorite guy, the guy that if you're in a league with me, he's not available, because that's Tyler Allgeier, 32% rostered. The Falcons, they are coming off their bye week as well. We always want to be mindful of these players coming off bye weeks who were dropped and who weren't used. But he's got 2 games for touchdowns, had nice games in a couple of games, and the Falcons, they love Tyler Allgeier. They want to keep him involved. Yes, Bijan Robinson is the clear lead back. But if anything happens to Bijan Robinson, don't you want his backup? The guy who would immediately step into a massive role. The Bills, their defense has been very up and down this year. There are ways to get at the Bills. They've given up the 40th most running back fantasy points before giving up a reasonable day to Ramondre Stevenson last night. And I just think that Tyler Allgeier is the perfect kind of guy who can give you massive contingent value if anything happened to Bijan, but also some nice standalone value as well. Let's talk tight ends, the worst position in fantasy football. Of course, it is always a nightmare. And look, if you need help with the tight end position, come back every week because we have our fantasy football tiers rankings videos, which come out towards the end of each week. Myself and Rich just breaking down how we see each position, which players are good streamers and which players we want to start. This week, I'm looking at picking up Brenton Strange. I'm recording this before Monday Night Football when he plays the Chiefs, so no idea how he's going to do in that one. That is not the easiest of matchups. The next week, he gets the Seahawks. The Seahawks have been an absolute cupcake matchup for anybody playing against him at the tight end position. Strange, he caught 6 passes in week 4. That was the third most among tight ends, 45 yards. He had 10 PPR points. He's also been above 9 PPR points on average this season. He just hasn't found the end zone, which was something he was doing last year. This Jags offense, it does seem like it's clicking, and I really like Brenton Strange. I'm absolutely willing to just pick him up and immediately start him against the Seahawks next week. Mason Taylor, 8% rostered. Look, I mean, you want to dive deep, then Mason Taylor is absolutely worth it. He's been the clear lead tight end for the Jets all season. He's played on more than 80% of snaps all year. He's played 100% of snaps in 2 and 3 tight end sets per PFF. And he started to see some real volume over the last few weeks. Like, it can be tricky finding volume at the tight end position, but Mason Taylor is managing it. Mason Taylor was somebody we were very excited for when he came out. Like, he's a fun player in college. And you go back over the last few weeks, 7 targets against Miami, 6 targets against Tampa. Like, those are good numbers. Against the Cowboys, he had 9 receptions for 67 yards. Like, he was only 4 yards behind Garrett Wilson to lead the team. This is a player who's massively involved as the number 2 passing option. And yes, it's always going to be miserable when you are betting on anything to do with Justin Fields' passing game. Yes, they play the Broncos in week 6 in London, which isn't exactly an ideal matchup for tight ends, but volume, it's tough to find at the tight end position, as we talked about, and I'm willing to take that bet on Mason Taylor. Last player, Harold Fannin Jr., 27% rostered. I know that the hype with Fannin's been up and down, but he's had 3 top 15 tight end performances in 5 games, 28 targets so far this year. The yardage has been disappointing, but yesterday against the Vikings, he got into the end zone for the first time. This week, they play the Pittsburgh Steelers. They are not taking a bye week after their trip to London. They are coming back and playing the Steelers straight away. Their defense for Steelers, it's not been good this year. They've allowed the 3rd most tight end fantasy points as well. So I think that Harold Fannin, as the bye weeks become more of an issue, is somebody that I'm willing to take and start, and maybe things can start to separate a little bit more with him and Njoku, or maybe it doesn't need to, because we saw Dylan Gabriel go to Njoku and Fannin consistently yesterday. But either way, he's got too much talent to be left out on waivers.
Now the drop list. Let's talk about that quickly. Jonnu Smith, look, it's just not happening in this Steelers offense. There's going to be no reliability. Pat Fryermuth's there, of course, but also they're bringing in Washington at times. That is just not a situation that you need any part of. Adam Thielen, now with Jordan Addison's back, just not at all fantasy relevant. Demario Douglas, he's going to pop up and have those PPR scam days, but it's so difficult to figure out when, and Stephon Diggs is really ascending in that offense now. Marvin Mims, look, I'm team Troy Franklin. I don't think that Marvin Mims is going to break to be that wide receiver 2 on that offense, and the passing volume just isn't there to be the 3rd or 4th option. Ray Davis, the Bills just aren't using him as much this year as they were last year. It's all James Cook, and James Cook has been so efficient that it's hard to see Ray Davis getting anywhere without an injury to James Cook. Trey Harris and Kyle Williams, 2 rookies who we had lots of hope for this offseason, but they're just not doing anything so far, barely involved. Trey Harris looks buried, Kyle Williams looks buried.
Those are your Week 6 waivers. Remember, we will be back on Thursday and Friday to talk about how we see the rankings and the tiers for these matchups. Make sure you hit the like button and the subscribe button on your way out.